the ACC, of course, coming out with its 60-40 revenue distribution to try to put a Band-Aid on its relationship with Clemson and Florida State and appease those two in particular going forward. Now we've got the process of a college football playoff of 16 teams that seems all but a done deal that will throw another team coming from the Big 12 and the ACC, but extra teams, of course, securing their spots from the Big 10 and the SEC. And I find it interesting that, and you would know this as well as anyone, that if you run the numbers and the rankings from last football season, while this is intended and pushed by the Big 10 and the SEC to help them to schedule as difficult as possible and still secure the spots,
right,
that BYU would have been the team that would have benefited last year because, of course, the Big 12 only had one team in, number 12, Arizona State, that, of course, became a top 4 seed. But BYU was sitting in that next position. And, of course, the Big 12 needed one more team. So BYU would have benefited from that format last year.
Yeah, look, I wish we're a dollar short and a day late, right? I mean, at the end of the day, better late than never is kind of what we need to look forward to. Tons of people on social media, a lot of people upset. Why? That's not fair. 4-4, 2-2, 1. Look, at the end of the day, it is the reality and what college football is now. So you can bay at the moon and only get the one team in, or you can be part of the process and at least try to secure that second team. And then if you have a really good season, you'll get a third team in. So I think the access is better to have than to just throw it to the wolves, only have 5 guaranteed spots, the 1 G5 and the 4 in the Power 4 leagues, and then everything else is just wide open. I think it would be better to guarantee that second access. There's no guarantee on this spot, obviously. It could be the 15th seed, it could be the 12th seed, but at least they would have had that second team in, and that would have been nice to see last year.
Nathan, I'm all for meritocracy myself, and I don't agree with this safeguarding positions for conferences. I believe that if there's a committee in play, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I think that they've done a decent job. I don't have a huge issue with any of the selections of the playoff teams going back to 2014. Would I have selected exactly all of the teams that have been selected? No, there's a couple nuanced selections I would have made differently, but I did not have an egregious issue with any of these selections over the course of 11 years. So if you've entrusted this committee, and of course the members change, but you've entrusted this committee and they're the ones supposed to be doing the job, then allow them to do their jobs and not force seedings and force entries into the playoff field. If the Big 10 and the SEC are clearly the best conferences, then they should be able to prove that on the field and earn those playoff spots.
I'm not for seedings. Don't get me wrong. I think it should be meritocracy. Whoever's at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the season should get that first spot. I have no problem with that at all. I think straight seeding works great. I think the first round home games work great. 16 teams is a good number. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is if you do look back at history, there would be a pretty good indicator that the ACC and the Big 12 wouldn't get those additional slots. Like, for instance, the Pac-12 never had one slot for 8 years. And so it's really hard to say how they should be justified to get all of those things reserved. Look, I like meritocracy. I'm a meritocracy guy. Being a BYU fan, you have to be. But at the end of the day, the system is slanted, and we either continue to tilt against windmills and hope that it just changes miraculously, or we try to give a little bit more of a leg up to those conferences that honestly you're spending the most money to compete. If we can go 1-16 and the committee is actually a fair committee and doesn't do what it did last year with eye test and some of these other sort of throw-in terms they use to justify some of their decisions, then I'm all for it. But I haven't seen it yet, and until I do, my mind's not going to be changed.
Folks, we got back-to-back shows here at the Voice of College Football, at least featuring me. I run from this show to the Iowa show, so please check us out, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central, with our buddy Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And we certainly want you to join Nathan and the crew at College Football Mafia. Nathan, when is the next time that you guys get together?
So I do a special show tomorrow night with Bob Thompson, the retired president of Fox Sports, and we're going to be talking 30,000-foot view of the ACC and where that's at. And I want to dive a little back into the media deals that are still up in the air with Mountain West Conference and the Pac-12. You got a bunch of schools in the G6 conferences that are fighting for relevancy. And those are two that just want to stay as near to the top as they can get. And Bob has a ton of insight, being a West Coast guy, being a Fox Sports guy. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. If we have time, I have a couple questions for him on the House settlement and the roster limits, but I'm not sure we're going to. I only got him for an hour, so we'll have to see how much I can get in and out of him.
Well, we'll try to get as much out of you as well, Nathan, for the next several minutes. And I
Sure.
guess we'll stay there in the ACC. I mentioned the revenue distribution share that was announced about a month to 6 weeks ago. And now we've had Clemson and Notre Dame get together for a 12-year deal to play through 2037. And obviously that's a play against the revenue distribution to say, hey, we want to grab Notre Dame every year because that's going to be a 5, 6, 8, maybe 8, 10 million viewed game, depending on how good we are. But we know it's going to be one of the highest viewed games of the ACC season, and we're going to grab that split. And then, as you well know, Florida State AD Mike Alford and Dan Radakovich, the Miami AD, came out immediately and said, yeah, we want the biggest brands to be playing. And then there was a slip from Dan Rad. I assume it was somewhat of a slip, making some kind of comment about a brand division versus a non-brand division. You know, what do you make of all of that, of possible changes in the ACC?
I think what I make of it is this is a conference that's fighting for survival, and the top brands are going to do anything they can to get a leg up. I think that it's a foregone conclusion in their minds, unless something changes, that they're probably going to be in this league for the next 3, 4, 5 years, and so they want to have every advantage that they can get while they're in there. The proposal of the brand, not the brand initiative with the money, but the brands playing the and splitting up the conference. The best brands play against the best brands, and everybody else has to fight for table scraps. That came from the Miami administration, right? And they obviously have their own axe to grind for their access and where they want to end up. So, in my opinion, and I've told you this a million times, what's happening in the ACC has already happened with the Pac-12. And you don't have a unified conference like you might see in a Big Ten and a Big 12. I don't know where the SEC's at today, but where everybody's unified, they're all rowing in the same direction. You have it's a survive or be eaten type situation with the ACC, and the best brands are going to want to do anything they can to get the leg up. I would be worried if I'm in the ACC about the California schools, SMU, Wake Forest, Boston College, Syracuse, maybe even Pitt could be on that borderline. If I was them, I'd be real proactive in doing anything I can to secure their future and not just continue to be slaves to everybody else that's currently running the ACC.
We understand that number one offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell has committed to Miami. That just came down in the last few minutes.
Yep.
So, folks, we appreciate that. And that information there in the chat. Leanne Herring's going to drop by at 5:15 Eastern to discuss that and all the recruiting news. And again, Nathan, Big 12 Mafia, college football mafia, the place to be. And he's got a big show coming up on Wednesday night. So this House settlement, the big hang up for Judge Claudia Wilkin for a number of weeks was the cutting of athletes, basically, that there would be 5,000 athletes across all sports that would be eliminated right away with these roster limitations. And, you know, the first indication she gave of how that could be handled would be, number one, grandfathering everyone who's currently on a roster in the NCAA. Mm-hmm. And then there's a few other ways. And I know that there was some information just released yesterday that I didn't get to, but there were a few layers involved in regards to how this could be handled. One was that players that had been cut during this off season would be reinstated. There were a few things involved there. Do you find anything in particular interesting or to be a hang up with the way this is headed in regards to roster limitations?
So let's get a few things first on the table. She was never an advocate for roster limits. That came from the NCAA and the P4. The primary reason to do that is to reduce costs. They only have so much money in the settlement. There's only so much that these schools can dole out for scholarships. So the easy way to cut that off is you just say there's a roster limit for every sport. Football, the limit dropped from say 130 or 140 with walk-ons to 105 only, and all those can have scholarships if you want to provide them. So the judge didn't want any part of this, right? This isn't something that she wanted or has tried to enforce. This came from the A4 and from the NCAA trying to reduce cost, and there's other reasons why they did it. All the objectors, all the parents of students that got cut, or have in the springtime lost their opportunity because the school wrote them a letter saying, sorry, the spot we were going to give you is no longer exists. We're getting rid of that program. She's not happy about that. And she told those guys to go back and basically change it. I want you guys to put it back to the way it was. Basically put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste dispenser. As I said that wrong, but you get what I'm saying. He wanted to unwind that bell, and the judge said, you guys need to make this better. So they proposed back last week, hey, this is how we make it better. It'll be voluntary. The schools can bring it back if they want to. And she's shaking her head this whole time, going, no, that's not going to be enough. So where we end up, I believe on the 18th will be the next ruling. There's a bunch of objector letters that have already been put in on top of the ones that were produced over the period of about 6 weeks beforehand. And we'll have to see if she wants to slap the A4 and the NCAA around and say, sorry, this just isn't enough. We're going to put the docket for an actual court case. We're going to go to court and let's solve this thing if you guys can't resolve it in the negotiating room. And they don't want that. If there's anything that the NCAA and the A4 do not want is to go to court. So they're playing chicken with the federal judge. I've talked to a lot of lawyers, very smart people, and nobody's ever heard of that before. So this is the first time anybody's seen anything like this. And it's really weird too, because it's a civil case. It's not even like there was a legal judgment by the federal government or something. This is just one party suing another party for access and for rights to monies and everything else. Nobody's ever seen it before. So in my opinion, the smartest people I talk to, they've all said that they don't think this is going to fly the way it is. And unless there's more changes, which they could continue to make incremental changes, it's going to be tough to see where that lands in the next coming weeks and months.
We've got a members only watch party coming up next Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And that is the game that you selected. So about 300 votes in Ohio State, Michigan from 2021. So we will all enjoy that one together.
That's a good game. Yes, that's a good game. Ohio State wouldn't want to watch that game, I don't think.
No. Now, whether that game's going to stand long term, that's another consideration. But we won't get into that.
Yes.
So the roster limitations, for as fascinating as that is, I think we know where that's headed, and there might be a little bit of nuance to it. What is going to fascinate me, this is the most interesting part of all this to me, is the $20.5 million that is going to be allocated to each individual athletics department, folks. So this is not just football, but number one question for me will be, how is each school going to divide that amongst its athletic programs? Are they going to strictly go merit-based and football gets 93% of the TV revenue for us out of this, so they're going to get 93, or however they're going to deal with that, the individual schools, number one. Number two, and even more fascinating to me, is how in the world do you distribute, let's say, $18 million to a college football roster and make that fair and make that so it doesn't become damaging to your locker room?
Boy, these are great questions, Mark. I don't know that I have the answers for them. I think it is fascinating. At the end of the day, I think we're going to see this over time, that the money's going to be doled out by the percentage of the responsibility that particular sport has at a school. Ohio State, most of the money is going to go to football. North Carolina, it might be 50-50 because they want more of that money to go to basketball. And so who has to make up the difference? The amounts are going to be in the tens of millions of dollars for a football program. That can't all come from the settlement. Then it's going to have to be made up by third party NIL. And I'll just speak for one I do know about, and that's BYU, right? They're spending a ton of money in NIL in both basketball and football. And I guarantee you that amount of money is going to follow success. So in 2 years, if BYU just goes on a terrible run again and wins 3 games and doesn't make the tournament 2 years in a row for basketball, you're going to see a natural retraction of that NIL money. If they win, they're going to get a bunch more of it. So each school is going to have to make up its own mind. How much do they have to subsidize to get their program off the ground and running, versus how much they have to invest in perpetuity to keep the program viable. I think that's going to be an amazing stat. What was it? Ohio State said they could put $35 million into their football program to win a national championship. That all can't come from that $20.5 million. So that means a lot of that money's come from third-party NIL and from corporations saying we want to win football games. And so each program is going to be able to make up their mind on that. And that's where the merit comes in my opinion, with NIL and everything else. If your program wants to succeed, put the money into your program. Get your people that have boosters to get the best players you can. And the schools that can't do that, they're naturally going to fall backwards. And that's just the way it's going to be.
I'm almost tempted to take a college football roster, whomever it might be, and try to determine how would I approach this and what do I think I could get away with in distributing this money to this roster, and how much of it would be just based on let's let the valuations let's be very generic with our evaluations and let the NIL supplement the best players. That's where the differentiation should come from. Or would I try to say, you know what, our right guard's better than our left guard. We're going to give him, 50,000 more.
Right.
Boy, that's a tricky business.
You know what's ironic is the one thing that college football would absolutely benefit from tomorrow is players to have a CBA and for them to have the rights to negotiate what a salary cap could be. Everybody is screaming. All these employer lawyers are abdicating. Darren Heitner is a good example, out there every day, really pushing to represent his athletes to get the most money possible. And he's the one who's saying, yeah, we need a CBA. We need our rights and privileges of these athletes to be protected. If they did that, it naturally would bring back the astronomical sums that are currently going to, like the quarterback who went to Michigan, $12 million. I mean, that's a crazy number for a guy that hasn't played a down of college football. How does that get reined in? College, I'm telling you, the NCAA and the A4, all they'd have to do is finally give in, say, okay, we're going to treat you as employees. The minute you do that, you get representation in a union, something like that. And at the same time, as an organization, we can begin to institute things like salary caps. You could institute things like the left tackle might get more than the right tackle. All of those things could be absolutely negotiated and put in place, and it will benefit the great majority of football players. Basketball is a little different because there's only 13 of them or whatever. But for football specifically, when you have a third string right tackle that can also play third string right guard, if they're going to be pegged to make a certain amount of money, the easiest way to do that is you negotiate it. So just give in and give them representation, treat them like employees, give them health benefits, ongoing care, things like this that they don't want to commit to today. But it will, in the end, at the very top, it will moderate and bring those salaries down. And what it'll do for the ones that are at the very bottom, the triple backup punter is going to make a little bit more money because it'll be more pushed to the middle. So, in my opinion, that would be the fix.
Wonder how much of a hit that 20.5 million would take if you include health benefits, because that's pretty substantial, especially when you talk about the health risks playing football.
Right. No, I mean, that needs to be negotiated. But we both know that Fox and ESPN are not running a poorhouse. There is all kinds of money out there. It just needs to be negotiated into a deal. And in my opinion, the money is out there to be had, and more of it needs to go to support the athletes, and less needs to be going to just a general scholarship fund of a school. I think there's other ways you can spend that money and really benefit the players long term.
So I'm curious, Nathan, as soon as any situation comes up, and it's more and more these days, where the competition on the field and the race for money and the arms race and everything that goes into big time competition clashes with the tradition of academics.
Yeah.
And for some schools like yours, other motivations, other incentives, other priorities, whether we're
Right.
talking the military academies with, of course, the obvious, or we're talking a religious affiliation.
Yeah.
So does BYU address this differently than other schools because of their priorities?
Well, I can already say yes. They've come out and actually put out statements saying BYU's more than likely never going to be the top bidder for any one particular athlete. They're on record as saying that. Clark C. Gilbert said that. He's the president of the university, so I think I can quote him and basically saying we don't want to be known for money. We want to be known for excellence in education and on the playing field. The problem with that is that third-party NIL is not part of the school. So it's one thing for the president of the university to come out and make a statement like that, but that doesn't mean it's going to control the boosters and how much money they're willing to submit to keep their operations going. Really, for fantastic athletes, you're going to get the richest of the rich. They're going to write a check and say, I want that guy, even if it's for a year, because this is where I see the growth. Either we want to win now, you're one player away from winning now, or maybe you're building a longer legacy program, and to do that, you have to invest money over a longer period of time. So I think each school has to go by their North Star, make their own decisions. But at the end of the day, third-party NIL is not controlled by the schools. They certainly have relationships. Their booster of one is usually a booster of another, but that doesn't mean there's any amount of control put in.
You bring up a point, Nathan, that I talk about all the time, because it seems like the average college football fan had issue when the players weren't making anything, and we'll wink at that because a few of them were, some of them, but it still was a low percentage. They basically weren't making money. Yes. And now they have an issue because they're making too much money. So people
why
have their
is
barometer,
that?
but it's usually based on how much money they make as opposed to, how much.
So let me ask you a question. Why does that matter? If you're Joe Blow, you have box seats on the 35-yard line, and they're legacy seats. They've been in your family for 30 years. Why do you care how much your school, let's say Ohio State, pays to have that player show up? I want the best team on the field. I could care less how much they cost, right? Because the money is already being put out to improve seating, to improve facilities. Money's already going to those things. So if you're just doing it just to spite your team, or you're doing it to spite another team because you're jealous and you don't have the boosters to back that up, that's a you problem in my mind. It has nothing to do with the school or the athletes. I want my athletes to make all the most money. It doesn't hurt me in the least. Just like I want the Seahawks to have the best contract deals they can for their best players. I don't care how much they cost. That money doesn't come out of my pocket.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because you touched on something with how a large portion of the NIL cannot be controlled because you can't control how much money people approach me all the time, call in here and so forth, and they want a cap placed on all of this. There needs to be a cap. Well, there's a cap in the NFL because that's income. There's not a cap placed on these players in the NFL going out and making endorsement deals.
That's right. It's only part of the CBA. It's part
they
of
can
the
make as much money as they want.
That's right.
That's America.
Yep.
If the marketplace drives it, then yes, we can put a cap on college football in the same way in regards to the revenue that's coming in, because that can be all placed under a business to say, well, X percentage should be targeted for operations and X percentage for administration and X percentage for the player income and salaries. But, if some millionaire tycoon wants to come out, and even if BYU takes this stance and he wants to pay the number one player in America $30 million to come play at BYU, that's what it is.
Hey, look, if it's legal, that BYU, that's all that BYU's needed. You're a history of college football guy. I know you respect where these programs have come and where some go up and some come down. The only thing that stopped BYU from being, I'm talking as near a blue blood as you could help, is money and access. They were never part of a big conference. By geography is what really drove that. And money was, quote unquote, illegal, even though you and I both know bagmen were given money to, for instance, SMU and brand new Corvettes and all these other things. BYU generally avoided those things because of the appearance of impropriety. Now, all those checks are off. They're part of a power league, and money is now legal. So anybody else that's complaining over the fact that BYU went from here to here, if they actually knew what the history of BYU football or BYU sports were, they would see, okay, now it makes total sense. You have, a fairly well-off membership to a church that goes out and gets educations and starts companies and has all kinds of revenue. They want to turn around and give money directly to the players. They couldn't do that before. Now they can. Now they have a top 5, basketball roster this year, and probably next 2 years, the football team would be somewhere at least in the 30s, if not the 20s.
Nathan Brown, College Football Mafia. And before we let you go, Nathan, we got a super chat coming in here from Mr.
Sweet.
No, it's My Rhino, who says, if 16-team playoff would not make sense for the Big 12 and the ACC, merge, creating a third league with 4 guaranteed spots for the new conference, just like the Big 10 and the SEC.
No, My Rhino. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate you being here and showing up for Mark's show. The Big 12, if they were to merge with the ACC, would water down the product to a point where now they're actually going to lose money in a media evaluation. There's a reason the ACC and the Big 12 didn't merge 2 years ago. It wasn't because they don't see efficiencies in scale and throwing 24 or 36 teams in one conference. There's ways to get around some of those scheduling difficulties and things, but the big problem is that pretty much every school in the Big 12 is worth about the same amount of money. That's not the case in the ACC. You take out the top 4 or 5 brands in the ACC, and the bottom of the rest are way, way low. And it would be completely disproportionate. So if you're a ACC fan, I apologize. I'm not trying to make you upset, but that's the biggest reason is a lot of those brands the Big 12 simply doesn't want.
Yeah, I basically took that ACC 60-40 formula, and I took the last 2 football seasons, and I directly took the math from the TV ratings and the percentages of viewers and took it to the finances. Now, I don't know if that's exactly I'm sure it's not exactly, but I did run it by some knowledgeable people that are closer to the situation than me, and they said, yeah, you did a pretty reasonable estimation, and it widens out. Now, with the same thing, minus the Colorado Dion phenom, that outlier of a situation over the last 2 seasons, you would not see that large of a discrepancy. Yeah, Oklahoma State's popular. Kansas State's been really good, and they're slightly ever so slightly. You would see a much compressed, more balanced distribution in the Big 12, but the ACC's got Clemson and Florida State, and then it cascades from there.
Yeah.
Miami's there, Louisville to an extent, but yeah, much different situation.
And there's a reason for that. The way they constructed the ACC was 15 years ago, we want to be the best basketball conference in America. So there was only 4 or 5 brands that put money into football. And that went for well over a decade. Come to find out, the bad guy shows up and says, okay, I'm here to collect. And the ACC is looking around going, well, we don't have any money for you. All our money went to basketball. Oh, you missed the bus. The bus was TV for football. That's what the bus is long gone. They're down the road in a different city. It's almost too late for you to play catch up now. So that's the biggest difference is the Big 12 didn't do that. The Big 12 grew its basketball holistically and is doing a pretty good job at it. And they have schools that generally aren't in debt. In fact, except for the four corner schools that came from the Pac-12, the Big 12 schools are pretty solvent. They're not making $1 billion, but they're not losing a bunch of money either. And yet the Pac-12 was run into the ground, and you know how you know that? Because the 4 schools that came into the Big 12 are all upside down in their finances. Arizona State, for one example, $51.7 million. Their legislature had to subsidize the athletic department at the Arizona State University. You're not seeing that in any other school in the Big 12. And all 4 of the schools that came in from the Pac-12 were way in debt because, again, a different show, but because of the way that Scott ran that conference, he hedged and said, we're going to get our money back way down the road. So go ahead and deficit spend now. So there's pure economics to this. It's not just Nathan doesn't like the ACC. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with for your conference to be viable. Once the top brands leave the ACC, there's only a few brands that are really able to carry the water, and those are the ones that are going to get picked up in other leagues.